ചടുലം സ്ഫുടതര നിപുണം കർമ്മം പാടാമീ നാടിൻ കാവൽ സംഗീതം നേടാം നന്മതൻ സ്നേഹം സന്തോഷം തേടാമെന്നെന്നും ശാന്തിയും സന്ദേശം ചേരാം നേരിന്റെ ലോകം കണ്ടെത്താൻ സത്യം പാലിക്കാൻ നിത്യം രക്ഷിക്കാൻ നിൽക്കുമ്പോൾ മൃദുഭാവം ദൃഢകൃത്യം ഇത് സേന നമ്മുടെ സേന ഓ സേന ഇത് സേന ശാന്തിരതം ഭയഭയരഹിതം വീരം നമ്മുടെ സേന സ്വയമർപ്പിത നിജ ഹൃദയം കടുകഠിനം ചലനം പ്രിയവചനം
ഞങ്ങൾക്കും നിങ്ങളാശ്രയം എന്നെന്നും നൽകും സാന്ത്വനം വഴികാട്ടുവാൻ ജനമൈത്രിയാൽ
കയ്യെത്തും ദൂരത്തെ സേന എന്നെഞ്ചിൻ കാവൽ ഭയഭയരഹിതം വീരം കൃത്യം ചടുലം സ്ഫുടതര നിപുണം കർമ്മം സ്വയം നിജ ഹൃദയം കടുകഠിനം ചലനം പ്രിയവചനം ഭയഭയരഹിതം വീരം നിപുണം കർമ്മം നമ്മുടെ സേന.
Hello and welcome to you all joining us here today. I'm Meera Jaydevan, a member of the organizing team here at Hackbee 2021. We are delighted to bring forth the fifth edition of Hackbee. This year, it's not just a competition to find winners. Instead, we aim to build a single solution with the help of participants and mentors to tackle down the need of the hour, demystifying the dark web. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our pillars of support. We have InVehicle Security as our technology partner, Cloud4C as our cloud partner, Mashup Stack as a knowledge partner, Ecoloop 360 as a sustainability partner, and Federal Bank and HDFC as our banking partners. Our community partners include ICMAC, OWASP, VCS India Affiliate, ASRG, ISACA Trivandrum Chapter, Nalcon, GTEC ATFG, and AWS UG Kochi. We would also like to thank our partners, BCF and vConsole. Thank you all for the support shown in organizing Hackbee. Today, we have our second live tech talk, and we have with us Mr. Kamel Ghali from ASRG, a community partner for Hackbee 2021. Kamel is a veteran of the automotive cybersecurity community, having spent over 3 years as an expert car hacker, technical trainer, and contributed to worldwide industry-focused communities such as SAE, ASRG, and the Hacking Village. His particular areas of focus within the vehicle security are Bluetooth, RF, and in-vehicle networks. He currently works at White Motion, subsidiary of the global automotive supplier Marelli, where he leads the vehicle security researchers team, assessing the vehicle systems and training customers the state-of-the-art car hacking techniques. Outside the garage, Kamel is an amateur chef, ukulele player, and a fighting game enthusiast. So, Before I hand over to Kamel, I would like to let the audience know that they can drop in their queries in the comment section on the Hackpeace Facebook and YouTube channels, and we will be responding to the queries at the end of the session. So, with great pleasure, I invite Kamel to enlighten us with the topic Introduction to Automotive Cybersecurity and its Importance to Global Security for the second session in this Tech Talk series. Kamel, so the stage is all yours now.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's just make sure that the screen is visible. Can the audience see the screen? Okay, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I didn't think you would read out the whole bio out loud, so it's a little bit embarrassing to to have you call me, kind of say the part about being an amateur ukulele player online, but it's nothing I'm ashamed of. So it's true, I do play the ukulele from time to time. But as mentioned before, yes, my name is Kamel Ghali. I am an automotive cybersecurity architect at White Motion and an automotive cybersecurity enthusiast. So I am going to be presenting to the Hackpeace conference on behalf of ASRG, one of the aforementioned community partners. I have a couple of slides about ASRG in the presentation, of course. I'll be explaining what kind of organization it is and why participation in it is beneficial, so on and so forth. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the topic today. So automotive cybersecurity and its role in global security. So Mira did speak a little bit about my background, but I have a short slide here for a brief speaker introduction. I've been in the automotive cybersecurity industry for almost 4 years at this point. I currently work at the company White Motion, which is a subsidiary of the global Italian automotive supplier, Marelli. I have a little bit more information about that in one slide, but I'm actually based in Tokyo, Japan, because of reasons that will soon be made clear in a second. Actually, the image in the background here is actually one of my car hacking teams from a competition that we entered a couple of years ago at DEF CON, one of the world's largest cybersecurity conferences and the site of the largest car hacking village, basically the biggest automotive capture the flag competition event held every year. You can see there's some of my friends, and then there's me there in the background. I'm a founder of the ASRG branch here in Japan. There wasn't one when I moved here, and so I've tried to take it upon myself to get ASRG rolling here. Again, I'll be speaking more about ASRG in detail in just a bit. And as mentioned before, some of my areas of interest within vehicle security, because as you will soon see, automotive security is a very, very broad subject. There are a lot of different technologies and sub-disciplines within automotive security that really each have their own different skill set. So the ones that I'm more interested in are Bluetooth and vehicle networks, and slightly lately USB and RF. So a little bit about the company that I work for. White Motion is a provider of automotive cybersecurity solutions and services to the automotive industry, governments worldwide, law enforcement agencies, etc. We are partnered with our parent company, Marelli, which merged with a Japanese tier 1 supplier a couple of years ago. That's why I'm based in Japan, right? I work for an Italian company in Japan because the Italian company joined with the Japanese company. And at the time, the company I work for now, White Motion, was owned by the Japanese supplier, Kasonic Kansei. And if you in the automotive industry may be familiar with them. But we provide a variety of cybersecurity focused services to our global clients, including OEMs, tier 1s, other suppliers, and industry, law enforcement, and government altogether. And then finally, before I get into the actual content, just have to give a quick shout out to ASRG, the Automotive Security Research Group. ASRG is a global nonprofit organization that's dedicated to expanding the accessibility of automotive security knowledge. We have regular meetings and webinars that we hold online these days, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We haven't had a lot of in-person meetings in our branches all over the world, but during more stable times, we have had regular in-person meetings. The way ASRG works, instead of having everything run through one central kind of global meeting where everyone in the world is tuned in all together, they're kind of managed regionally. And so there's going to be a different branch of ASRG in almost any area you can think of. Chances are there's an ASRG branch very close by to you. I believe at least within Asia, we have one in China. We have at least one in India, I believe. One of them is in Bangalore. I'm honestly kind of forgetting where all of them are because we have so many. And then, of course, there's the one in Japan that I lead, and then there's the one in Detroit that I used to be part of. That's Detroit, Michigan. But we're growing very quickly. It's free to join, and there's a lot of beneficial information available for free for anyone interested in learning more about the automotive cybersecurity industry. And I encourage anyone interested to learn more at asrg.io. So enough organizational stuff. Let's get to the actual topic of today's discussion. So automotive cybersecurity. Do cars need security? Well, yes, they do. The modern cars do definitely, for sure, need cybersecurity. So in the past, the vehicle was basically just a hunk of metal equipped with an engine that went really fast. So you would sit inside your car, and the idea was the car could move much faster than you could and get you very far places, in a much shorter amount of time without you having to exert a lot of effort. It was a step up from horses and carriages, and they were largely mechanical appliances in the past that were basically only interested in moving you from point A to point B. As society has evolved over time, we've introduced technology into every part of our lives. We've introduced smartphones into every part of our lives, and a lot of the similar advances in mobile computing and communication have found their way into vehicles as well. So over time, cars began to incorporate electronics in them. So the car is no longer purely mechanical. It's actually a combination of mechanical and electrical and chemical, even if you consider for electric vehicles, you have their batteries, which are, of course, chemically powered. But the electronics inside a car are one of the most important aspects of any vehicle today. So as you can see here on the slide, cars contain over 100 million lines of code. And that number is probably going to reach 200 million lines of code any day now, right? So the cars are becoming very sophisticated. They have a lot of proprietary code running in them, open source code as well, of course. And then if you compare this to something like a military fighter jet, these on average will have 7, maybe 8 million lines of code. So it's very interesting when you think of like a military jet. This seems like the height of sophistication when it comes to vehicle technology, right? But at the end of the day, they're very streamlined in what they do. They have a very narrow kind of scope of application that they fulfill. And so compared to that, the general purpose of a vehicle, there's much more code inside a vehicle, making the vehicle a very highly advanced computing platform on wheels these days, right? So this code is found in electronic control units, or ECUs, within the vehicle. These will be your microcontrollers, your processors that are connected to sensors or actuators or any other part of the vehicle that's controlled and needs data electronically. These ECUs are what we call the microcontrollers inside the car that do this information processing. And as cars get more complex and begin communicating with the outside world more, for example, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, they become more susceptible to cyber attacks and thus need security to be taken seriously. So in the last 30 years or so, we've seen a big increase in electronification of vehicles, right? Adding of computers to vehicles. But then in the last 10, 15 years within that time range, we've added a lot of communication as well. So cars used to be very internally self-contained computing areas. But now that we've added things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, et cetera, to these vehicles, they're exposed to the outside world, and thus cybersecurity is much more important. So cybersecurity is definitely a new field. This is one thing that I want to say when it comes to the automotive industry. The automotive industry itself is very old, as you may already know. It's a very established industry, and it has kind of a culture that goes with that established reputation. It's a very slow-moving industry, and it's not quick to adapt new things. Often cutting-edge changes take a long time to adapt, and cybersecurity has kind of come in as a disruptor because all of a sudden, the automakers have realized that we're adding all this connectivity, all of these new cool features like Bluetooth or GPS or 4G, Wi-Fi hotspots in the car, et cetera, software updates over the air, streaming from the vehicle, et cetera. All these things being added are great from a convenience perspective, but because cybersecurity was never an important part of the vehicle ecosystem in the past, it kind of snuck up on the industry, and now there's a huge boom in cybersecurity in the automotive industry. It's very necessary at every level of the supply chain and throughout the entire automotive development process. Something that the automakers have actually realized as cybersecurity has become more prevalent in their own design process is that cybersecurity isn't something you can just apply to a system as complex as a vehicle at the very end. It has to be something that you keep in mind from the very beginning. So when you're designing the vehicle, when you're planning the vehicle, when you're actually producing the vehicle and you perform testing along the way, you need to make sure cybersecurity is kept in mind the whole time. This will become relevant again when we talk about some of the different standards and legal regulations that are in place surrounding automotive cybersecurity later on in the presentation. And then this is something that I mentioned earlier, but among the different cybersecurity disciplines in the world, it's very broad and it incorporates elements from several different fields. For example, you have your traditional network security, plays a very important role in automotive cybersecurity, but then you also have things that are a little bit lower level, closer to the physical side of things, like radio hacking or USB hacking or actual physical networks, signal decoding and interference. Right? Code analysis and binary reverse engineering are also key parts of having a full automotive cybersecurity skill set, right? So automotive cybersecurity is, of course, very broad, and there's no one person that's an expert in every one of these disciplines. Maybe there is one or two people out there who are much smarter than myself. I can't say I'm an expert in every single discipline included in automotive cybersecurity, but I do my best. I do my best, right? But let's talk a little bit about the different technologies that are actually found in a car. Because when you think about your modern car, right, they're very sleek, very, well-defined, very smooth looking, and they often have a lot of electronics and a lot of different features, especially with the modern electric vehicles that are coming out these days. And so some of the technologies found within vehicles I have listed here on the screen. And we call the different technologies that can be subject to a cyber attack an attack surface, right? So the more attack surfaces that you add to a vehicle, the higher the possibility of a, a malicious hacker or a bad actor having an opportunity to try and interfere with this vehicle's operation or steal data or spy on the passengers or lock the vehicle down for moving. These are all different types of cyber attacks we'll talk about later on in the presentation. But I always like to kind of give an example just to show how many different types of technologies there are inside a vehicle today. So some of the more interesting ones here are the in-vehicle networks. These are particularly interesting because among all the technologies, these are the ones that are honestly vehicle specific. You won't find these technologies outside of the automotive industry. And that's noteworthy because what this means is that the skill sets to work with these technologies in a cybersecurity, sense, it's not very common within the broader cybersecurity community. And that isn't to say that it's, incredibly hard and only select elite people know how to do it. It's just that it hasn't been relevant to cybersecurity for very long. So cybersecurity is a very established industry as it is now. It's still, of course, growing very quickly, but there are certain things that are considered common knowledge, whereas these in-vehicle networks are technologies that are exclusive to the automotive domain, and they don't have as much exposure outside. So for example, I have a couple of different specific network technologies listed here. We have the controller area network, CAN. This is the most common one, the most important one, I would say. The local interconnect network is kind of like the little brother of the CAN bus. FlexRay, automotive Ethernet. If these aren't familiar, don't worry about it. As I mentioned, they are very heavily automotive exclusive. They're very specific to the automotive industry. They're kind of next generation networking technologies that allow vehicles to send lots of data very quickly from one processor to another. And this is all very important in order to realize things such as ADAS systems, right? ADAS stands for Advanced Driver Assistance System, right? So an ADAS is something that protects the driver. It helps make their job easier. Maybe it's like a lane keeping function, or for example, in modern Teslas, you have things like autopilot. These are what you would consider an ADAS, right? And in order for these to work, they need to be able to send a lot of data very quickly between different components in the car, be it sensors or other ECUs or actuators, so on and so forth. Moving forward, we have a couple of wireless networks that you might find in your modern vehicle today. So obviously Bluetooth is a very easy one, right? Bluetooth has been in vehicles for, I'd say, almost almost 15 years at this point, right? I think that Bluetooth first began to find its way in vehicles in the late 2000s, before the 2010s. Excuse me. And, Bluetooth is generally used in your car as just, okay, I can connect my phone to my car and then I can play my music through the speakers. Or if I have a phone call, I can answer the phone using the car's speaker and microphone without having to hold my phone up to my hand, right? This means that, if I'm doing this, I only have one hand on the steering wheel, and that's a safety concern, right? But adding Bluetooth to the car was very convenient. It made it so that you could actually take a phone call by just pushing a button on your steering wheel, and you can talk through your steering wheel's microphone and then hear the feedback from the stereo, right? Sounds pretty intuitive. But as some very intelligent security researchers have proved over the last few years, Bluetooth is actually rather insecure at times and can actually be hacked with varying degrees of difficulty, of course. But there have been some vulnerabilities disclosed that have shown Bluetooth being used as a foothold for attackers to gain access to the internal vehicle systems and compromise the vehicle even further. Wi-Fi is a rather new one, but it is definitely very easy to understand, right? You have Wi-Fi in your house, you have Wi-Fi in your office, and now you have Wi-Fi in your car. So your car has Wi-Fi, it connects to the Wi-Fi in your house, and what can you do with it? Well, maybe the vehicle has some kind of software update it wants to apply, right? OTA, over the air. This is a kind of a framework by which vehicles can be delivered software updates through the internet instead of having to take your car to a dealership and them updating the software manually, right? In the past, if your vehicle needed to have the software updated on any of these ECUs inside the vehicle, you'd have to take your car to the dealership, and the dealer would have a special tool with some special files, some special code. They would plug it into a port in your car, and they would send the data to it, reflash your ECU, and then you'd be on your merry way. Now, obviously, it's not that hard, but you have to take your vehicle to the dealer, and the dealer has to spend maybe 20, 30 minutes doing it, and it's kind of a pain. And when certain large-scale reflashing events have to happen, for example, if there's some kind of a safety issue that affects an entire model year or unit type of vehicle, all the cars of this type need to be serviced. It becomes a very lengthy process of getting all these cars in at once to a dealership and having them reflash. So over-the-air updates enabled cars to update their software through the internet by just connecting to your home Wi-Fi, right? Sounds great. But what happens if that Wi-Fi is then used to compromise one of the units inside the vehicle? What if that Wi-Fi is hosting a service that can be exploited, and God forbid, an attacker is able to get remote code execution on the unit inside your vehicle through that Wi-Fi portal? Well, now you've officially added a mid-range vulnerability or attack surface to your vehicle, and of course, this is something you need to consider from a cybersecurity perspective. Onto the long-range networks, right? You have cellular and GPS. GPS is mainly used for geolocation services, but GPS is also very relevant from a cybersecurity perspective because you can actually jam or manipulate GPS with some specialized hardware. It's pretty hard to get, and I think it's illegal in a lot of countries, but it is actually possible to spoof GPS signals. And in the event that you're a bad person, you're trying to trick someone into going somewhere that they're not expecting to go, you could spoof a GPS signal and maybe fool their car's navigation system, lure them to an empty parking lot, and then, I don't know, try and sell them something, right? Who knows? At that point, it's up to your imagination. And then you have cellular, LTE, and 5G, right? These are the long-range networks that we use in our phones, right? When I go outside, I don't have my home Wi-Fi, but my phone is connected to a LTE network. So I can actually watch YouTube or use the internet on my phone while I'm on the go. And likewise, as you may be familiar with, your phone can act as a hotspot. You can kind of send Wi-Fi signals from your phone to other nearby devices that want to connect to you. Where your car could do the same thing now. Your car has the power to, through a cellular connection, share that internet with everyone inside the vehicle. So instead of connecting to the Wi-Fi in your house, you could connect to the Wi-Fi in your car, and while you're on a road trip, you'll be able to watch YouTube or use Facebook or WhatsApp or anything you like, right? And obviously, this is another cybersecurity hazard, right? Potential hazard. It's an attack surface. It's a very long-range attack surface. That means that the car is available on the IP network infrastructure from potentially anywhere in the world if it's reachable, right? Now, granted, if it's done properly, that shouldn't be the case, but these are things that need to be considered, right? And then finally, dedicated short-range communication. This one I can't talk too much about because it's not quite heavily put into practice yet, but it is essentially super Wi-Fi that's used for cars so that they're able to communicate with other cars in their area and other, infrastructure and buildings, etc. This is part of what's called V2X communication, vehicle to everything communication. This is the idea that your car will communicate with the world around it as it operates in any environment, and it will be able to use information that it gathers and exchanges with other vehicles or traffic lights or street signs or whatever to kind of help with automated driving, right? This all comes back to self-driving cars and the transportation of the future. And then, of course, software, right? When it gets down to it, at the end of the day, each of these microcontrollers is running code. And if this code is not secure, has bugs or exploitable vulnerabilities, then it's possible that any of these can lead to a full vehicle compromise in the worst case scenario, right? Of course, that's not always going to happen, but you need to make sure that you have these kind of checks in place to kind of ensure the sanity of the code. You got to make sure that it's clean code, it's coded securely, kind of check it against different coding guidelines, etc. Do it however you wish, but at the end of the day, software is also a great place to look for bugs and potential vulnerabilities that could compromise the vehicle. So what does the automotive cybersecurity industry look like today? So a big part of the industry, and honestly cybersecurity in general, is that it's always evolving. So following news surrounding automotive security is quite a big deal. It's a big part of what I do at work. I've posted a couple of examples of important news articles or publications that have kind of shaken up the automotive cybersecurity industry. As shown here, this is the kind of like the mother goose of all car hacks, right? A couple of white hat researchers showed that they could take control of a Jeep without ever touching this Jeep, ever, from miles away, and actually kill the brakes and mess with the steering wheel, mess with the music, mess with everything. It's an incredible article, freely available on the internet for anyone who wants to see it. I think anyone interested in this industry should definitely watch this video at least once, and you can kind of see the potential damage that can be caused by a hacker to a vehicle that isn't properly secured. These two were able to actually take control of a vehicle from long range, which is kind of like the holy grail of car hacks, right? And this single incident sparked the whole automotive cybersecurity industry, as it were. And so this is kind of seen as the patient zero of worst case scenario car hacks, right? This is a more recent one, actually. This is some work that a lab based out of China did on some Lexus vehicles. They did some research that they published on Lexus vehicles showing that through Bluetooth, as I mentioned earlier, they were actually able to infiltrate the head unit in the system, reflash a couple of boards inside. I'm abbreviating because I don't want to go in depth. I could talk about this for hours, but they showed that through exploitation of a Bluetooth vulnerability, they were able to get a backdoor into the system, and from there, reflash different computer boards, remove filters on the CAN bus communications, allowing them to send arbitrary CAN messages to some extent, and basically pwn the car all through the Bluetooth network, which is not really considered. It's not like on the first page of anyone's automotive cybersecurity to-do list. It's usually kind of an afterthought, but these researchers showed that Bluetooth is definitely a very viable method of entry into a vehicle's architecture. Over here, I have listed the ISO SAE. This is the International Standards Organization in tandem with the Society of Automotive Engineers, the DIS 21434 standard. This is a industry standard that has been published to help global automakers around the world better the cybersecurity of their vehicles. This is a standard to encourage best practices and essentially give a guideline to which automakers can adhere to ensure that their vehicles are being developed in as cyber secure a manner as is possible. Well, of course, one of the things about cybersecurity is that no one can tell you that, X product is 100% secure and will never be hacked ever. But you can have procedures in place that make it so that your device has gone through as much testing as possible, and it is in a position from a cyber perspective as possible before it's released onto the market. Likewise, the United Nations actually published a regulation last year in June called, we call it the UNECE WP29. It has a very long name, but we call it WP29. It's essentially a regulation about automotive cybersecurity. And this is kind of the twin sister to the ISO standard, whereas this is based on the industry standards. This is actually based on a framework for governments. This is a framework by which governments can hold automakers in their countries responsible, essentially saying, like, by law, you're now required to incorporate these kinds of cybersecurity checks. You need to make sure that any vehicle you want to put onto the road has received a certification of good health, of cybersecurity health, before you're allowed to sell it, right? It also outlines things like a cybersecurity management system, right? A system by which an organization keeps track of cybersecurity activities and ensures that cybersecurity is taken into account for the entirety of a vehicle's lifespan. All of these things go into an individual country's lawmaking process, and they make their own laws that actually put these into effect, giving them the ability to guide their industry members through the cybersecurity process as best as they can. So staying up to date with news, skipped that a little bit too early. Staying up to date with news is important, but it is a little bit hard. But as soon as you start reading about these things, there's a lot of information available out there. I'll be sharing a couple of resources at the end of the lecture. But you'll realize that a lot of the same themes keep popping up in different exploitations and research publications about automotive security. So for law enforcement, I understand that the HackP conference is being, sponsored, of course, hosted by the Kerala police. And so I wanted to include a little bit about the law enforcement side of things. So what role does law enforcement play when it comes to automotive cybersecurity in the world today? So the industry of automotive security only exists because there are people in the world who would hack vehicles with malicious intent. They might be looking for, espionage or to steal information, payment information, phone contacts, text message contents, etc., from a vehicle. And naturally, law enforcement agencies are a key factor in mitigating the risk posed by these bad actors. So law enforcement needs to have an appropriate understanding and awareness of the novel attacks possible on modern automobiles. This crime is, of course, very wide in breadth. It ranges from data theft to espionage to even vehicle theft or terrorism, God forbid, right? What if you have a vehicle that gets taken over by a hacker very far away, and they use this vehicle to kind of go on a rampage in the street, right? If my cell phone or my laptop gets hacked, the absolute worst case scenario is, okay, maybe they got my credit card number, maybe they got, some of my files, and I have to kind of scramble to, restore them or something, right? But no one's going to die. If my computer gets hacked, no one is going to die as a direct result of this. There's no possibility of bodily injury coming to anyone because my computer or cell phone was hacked. But a car is a very different story, right? This is it weighs thousands of pounds. This is an iron shell that is driving 60, 70 miles an hour, 80, 90 kilometers an hour down the road. And all of a sudden you can't control it. And it's going left, right, up, down, slamming the brakes, crashing into things, and you don't have any control over it. This is something that can really impact public safety in the absolute worst case scenario. Of course, this is not something that's easy to do. And I will never say that is, but I will also never say that it is impossible to happen, because this kind of possibility always exists if a malicious party is dedicated enough to committing this kind of crime. And then there are things like automotive ransomware, which is one particularly scary type of cyber attack, right? We've seen recent events in the United States, for example, that ransomwares can have devastating effects on countries and communities that are targeted by them. That attack on the pipeline in the United States cost millions of dollars to be resolved, and it resulted in oil shortages. And there was a lot of panic about oil not being available in the United States for a while. But in the end, if you think about it, an automotive ransomware attack would be just as terrifying, right? Imagine if all the cars in a city got hacked and they could no longer move, right? What if all the cars stopped moving and no one could drive them anymore? And what if this included ambulances or fire trucks or police cars. How are you supposed to proceed throughout, your day-to-day activities? Nobody can get to work. Nobody can get to the grocery store. If someone needs an ambulance and all the ambulances are locked, they're clamped down, right? We call this clampware when we're referring to an automobile, because the car's been hacked and it can't move anywhere. It's like when the police put a clamp on your car so you can't drive away. Only this time it's a hacker, right? They've basically said, you need to pay me $500 in Bitcoin or else your car is never going to move again. Well, what do? Well, you can say, okay, maybe if I bring it to the dealer, they'll be able to help me, which sounds like a good strategy if this happens to like 1 or 2 people. But what happens when this happens to a whole city and you have, 3 or 4 dealerships, trying to deal with all these vehicles that have been, hacked? And, how many tow trucks do you have? You can't have everyone getting towed through the street when every single car is locked down, right? It doesn't really work. It's a very scary possibility, of course, but these kind of possibilities need to be kept in mind by law enforcement if they want to be prepared for this kind of scenario, right? Law enforcement is also heavily linked to the incident response process. This is the process that basically takes place whenever a cybersecurity incident happens. This is not unique to automotive, of course. Incident response is an important part of traditional cybersecurity as well. But in automotive, it's a little bit more complicated, right? Because we have these laws and standards that we talked about before. The industry has to work together with the government, which has to work together with the law enforcement, right? The law enforcement's job in this is, of course, to make sure that further attacks are prevented as best as they can. They need to protect the victims from any legal liability. This one is actually kind of shared responsibility between the law enforcement officials and the government and the legislation, right? So the legislation will usually define, okay, in the event of an automotive hack, if there's sufficient evidence that a vehicle was hacked and caused some damage, the poor guy who owns the car shouldn't be held responsible, right? Within limitations. If he intentionally chose not to update his software, etc. This is actually how they do things here in Japan. The Japanese government has already started to include automotive cybersecurity and car hacking stipulations in their motor rules here. If there's evidence that your car was hacked and you have evidence that you kept your software up to date and all of your software patches and security patches from your OEM are installed, then you're free of any liability that your car to damage that your car may cause. For example, if my car was hacked and, God forbid, crashed into someone's house or destroyed another person's car, as long as I can show that my vehicle was up to date with all the OEM software updates, etc., the government would then treat this incident as damage caused by a stolen car. So had someone taken my keys, gotten in the car, and run someone over, it's not my fault, right? It's obvious, it's out of my hands. I can't telepathically stop him just because it's my car, right? So the same kind of liability framework needs to be put in place in every, and this is going to look different in every country because, of course, the United Nations doesn't mandate, it can't force any country to adopt a certain liability framework. It can only give recommendations on how to go about with these processes, and each country is going to adopt that in their own way for their own population. Right. And then, of course, prosecution when there is an event of an automotive cyber attack, right? This might be dealt with in the same way that organized crime is, right? Maybe you have to hunt down a malicious group of bad acting car hackers and make sure that they're brought to justice so that they aren't able to continue this kind of, public menace activities, right? But then the question comes, how do you actually prepare for this? How do you get yourself ready to deal with a very scary, unknown threat that is very new into the industry? So despite the fact that it's very new, there are several ways for law enforcement agencies and, of course, anyone else to prepare for the connected transportation security future. So, excuse me, I'm sorry, my throat's getting a little bit strained. But there's a lot of appropriate education out there. So knowledge of the relevant laws and standards, of course, is the first step. It's key to understanding what kind of automotive cybercrime is possible and how it should be dealt with within the confines of any country's legal system. This ties back to documents such as the United Nations document I mentioned earlier, the WP29, and the ISO SAE 21434 standard. But it's also important to remember that each country is going to have its own unique application of these within its own legal framework. Technical training is important to prepare engineers and specialists and technicians capable of understanding and resolving an automotive cybercrime situation. Excuse me. So sorry. But companies like the one I work for, White Motion, we actually, a lot of our business comes from offering technical training and standards compliance training to industry members as well as government and law enforcement agencies. So we, a lot of our activities are centered around the idea that this knowledge needs to be shared with all the relevant people. This is people who are in industry, so the automakers, the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, law enforcement agencies, government agencies, anyone that has a hand in this automotive cybersecurity framework, they need to understand these things. And so we take it upon ourselves to actually teach a lot. And that's part of why I'm happy to present at this conference, because I want everyone to, at the very least, the first step is being aware that it exists, because this is definitely going to become more important as vehicles become more sophisticated in the future. Next, of course, is collaboration with the relevant industry members as well as government. This is very important for making sure that your incident response plan is put in place and is working. And this kind of ties into international organizations such as Interpol. I actually have a friend at Interpol who does a lot of work in spreading awareness of automotive cybersecurity and helping law enforcement agencies in different parts of the world actually get the training that they need and equipping them with resources that they would need to understand the cybersecurity situation in automotive and be prepared for an incident if it were to happen within their own countries. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to the different community participation opportunities. So participating in communities centered around automotive security is a good way to stay up to date on any developments in the industry. So these communities can be local or international organizations such as ASRG. ASRG is kind of both. It's local and international because, excuse me, sorry about that. Each individual branch of ASRG is run with its local audience in mind, but at the same time, you have access to all the resources and all of the information that's shared by the global ASRG network. These communities are a valuable resource for learning about novel automotive hacking techniques or vulnerability disclosures. If you want some help with technical training or tools, ASRG has services to help put you in touch with the right people to teach you how to use certain tools or technologies to equip yourself with the appropriate knowledge to understand automotive cybersecurity. And some of these organizations, of course, they have paid membership structures, but they'll often have a free newsletter or something that will help you keep you informed anytime any important news comes out, at the very least. Right. So a couple of resources that I'd like to recommend, of course, before I finish up. I'm almost done, so sorry if I've taken too long. But of course, I've already talked a lot about ASRG, the Automotive Security Research Group. Free to join. It's a very great resource. There's a lot of lectures like this one uploaded to YouTube already, where you can learn about different technologies, different things affecting the automotive industry, different strategies to fight against cybercrime, et cetera. There's a lot to be learned from the ASRG community. Car Hacking Village is another one that I'm deeply involved in too. It's an organization that does similar things to ASRG, but prefers to present things in person to people at conferences. So if there's if any of you have heard of the DEF CON security conference, that's where the Car Hacking Village will show up every year with a huge turnout. They'll have cars, they'll have actual, platforms, they'll have people giving lectures and presentations, talking about their own research, talking about different things that they've seen in automotive security, in their own car hacking hobbies and activities, etc. Great resource, and I highly recommend anyone interested to give them a look. The Auto ISAC and SAE, these are kind of very industry-focused organizations. The Auto ISAC is focused on security specifically. It prides itself in being one of the biggest sharers of automotive cybersecurity knowledge. The original Auto ISAC is based in the United States, but there are derivatives in other countries worldwide as well. The SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, worldwide organization that covers a lot of different engineering disciplines within automotive, not just cybersecurity, of course, but the SAEs definitely played a large part in ensuring the future of cybersecurity in automotive. As you may mention, as you may remember, I mentioned the SAE ISO standard that was passed very recently in one of my previous slides. And then finally, Twitter, a lot of really helpful car hackers and experts on automotive cybersecurity can be found on Twitter. And it's free, right? If you just go and talk to them, they'll be happy to talk to you usually. And it's a great resource. So I am all out of clever things to say. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you taking the time to let me talk to you about this subject that I it is my job, but I'm also very passionate about it. If that isn't obvious from hopefully the way I'm speaking helps you understand that it's a very fun industry to be in. I have my email listed up there on the screen in case you ever have any questions, or even if you want a copy of the slides, just go ahead and send me an email. I'll be happy to share them with you. Nothing I keep secret in here, right? It's all for you guys, right? I want to help share the joy of being part of this wonderful booming industry. And of course, if you have any questions about the industry or anything at all, or you need some cybersecurity training and you don't know where else to go, then by all means, please send me an email. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And let's get to the questions, I guess.
Yeah. So now we are open to the Q&A, and please drop in your queries. Kamel will be responding to it. Okay, there is a question from Karan Sanchnani. What's a good test setup to begin learning and practicing technical car hacking with the lowest barrier to entry? Is it possible to virtualize a testbed for automotive hacking?
I love this question. So you have the right mindset, definitely. Sometimes car hacking can be expensive because you need to have a car. But that's not always the case. There are some technologies that actually have very strong virtualization options. And one of these is CAN bus, for example. CAN bus is one of the most fundamental technologies to know in car hacking. And you can get very far in understanding and learning CAN bus even without any hardware. You can actually have options for virtualized CAN buses that behave almost exactly the same as a real CAN bus minus the physical aspects. Man, I really should have brought some water. I'm so sorry. But there are definitely resources available that can show you how to use open source free CAN bus tools. These are software tools that will work with any kind of cheap hardware that is not super expensive. And there's also, like I said, the virtualization option where you can have a virtual CAN bus that behaves almost exactly the same as a real one. What do I think about Indian car technology? So I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know very much about Indian cars because Indian cars aren't really seen very often outside of India, to the best of my knowledge. None of the countries I've lived in have had a lot of Indian cars. I know that I believe Tata is one of the biggest. I believe is it Tata is one of the biggest like car manufacturers in India. Maybe I could be wrong. Please don't go mad at me if I don't know them. I've never actually driven an Indian car myself, but I would love to have the opportunity to work on some Indian cars just because I'm sure there's a very noticeable culture difference in how they're built compared to Japanese or American automobiles, because I've lived in Japan and America in my lifetime, and so those are the ones that I know the best. But I would definitely love to see how an Indian car company structures theirs differently. Any other questions? No? I'm always happy to answer any more on email. If you're too shy to ask in the comments here, then please don't feel shy. Just send me an email. I won't tell anyone. Secret just between you and me. So
can we wait a couple of minutes to see if there is
of course. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not going anywhere. This is the only thing I had going on tonight, so no problems. Great time. I look forward to hacking some cars. I hope that you have fun hacking cars. It's a very fun industry to be in. It's very exciting, especially when you get things working. You finally get to kind of see your car respond to what you're doing to it. It can be very rewarding. It's a very, very great industry to get involved in right now. If you do find something awesome, and you want to make a publication about it and you just don't know how, get in touch with me and we'll help you find a conference to present it at. I'll be happy to help you with that.
Okay, I guess there are no more questions. So that was a very eye-opening interaction, Kamel. And we have received a vast amount of really excellent insight from you this evening. So we are very grateful for your ideas and also for your expertise. So, on behalf of Hackpay, I extend a sincere thanks to you for being with us today. Thanks to all who tuned in. So, and if you have any additional queries, as I mentioned, you can mail him. I think he's open to mails, and yeah. So, if there is any other queries which you can't put in here, so please do mail him. He will be responding to it. So thanks to all who tuned in today, and for the upcoming Tech Talks sessions and details, please check the announcements on our social media handles. So see you all again. Stay safe. Thank you.